Okay, let's do this.
Oh,
Let's do
Asid.
2020.
Asid is the first one to kick us off in the new year. He's ready for it.
2024.
Here we
2024,
go.
my friends.
Sam
I
has
got
installed new internet, so
I got feedback.
Ooh.
We swear too much.
Ah.
It was good feedback because my friend said I can't listen in the car.
Ooh.
I can't listen when I'm taking my kids to school because I just don't know what kind of F-bombs are going to drop come out.
Oh shit. I mean,
you just
oh
did
no.
it again.
Oh gosh. Oh gosh.
I thought you were going to say that my mom, who I asked for your address, and I don't know why, wrote you a note and said that. I thought that's what that was going to be, because that's been her feedback the entire time. She's very cautious of it. It's like the Tesla mode. You know, the Tesla has like there was someone that wrote Elon Musk. I think his name was Tom, and I don't use this mode. But now Elon got really frustrated because it said there was beeping noises when he has a baby in the back, like just beeping in general when you get too close to things. And so it's called Tom's mode in your Tesla, and you can turn it on and it doesn't beep, doesn't wake up the baby. So
I love that. We need that for our
all
language.
right, here it is. I'm going to get it out of my system. I'm fucking sorry. There we go.
All right. For the future, though, for the future.
We'll do it from the next one, guys.
This is the last episode that Nell cannot listen to when Derek's taking her to work.
Sorry,
taking her to school.
This is TOPLINE.
This episode of TOPLINE is brought to you by Affinity for Salesforce. Affinity for Salesforce brings powerful automations and deal-driving relationship intelligence to the Salesforce CRM and extends these insights into your email and browser. Automate the creation, update, and enrichment of Salesforce records and use your network and relationship insights to find, manage, and close more deals. To learn more, visit us at go.affinity.co/pavilion. That's go.affinity.co/pavilion. How's everybody doing? Asid, you're sick.
I'm sick. I started the year off feeling fantastic yesterday, and I woke up today with fever. My body hurts. I'm coughing, but I'm happy. So I'm good.
All right. I'm sorry to hear that. Anything I can do?
It's life. Just send me good wishes. Keep me in your thoughts and prayers, Sam. Keep me in your thoughts and prayers.
Those are very impactful. So. AJ, how are you?
I'm doing well. As you two know, we ended the year in a great spot as a company. We hit our plan, which is always a good feeling. And then I showed up on January 2nd and I told the sales team, okay, none of that shit you guys did matters. So like, it's a nice try, but good work. No, shout out. I'm going to give my shout out up front. And I'm just like 2024, just throwing the playbook out the window. Shout outs coming up front on TOPLINE. We need to shout out to Milligan I'll have another shout out, but shout out to Milligan, who in his first quarter as the VP of sales absolutely crushed it. Not only was the company on financial plan, but the sales team was over 100% of quota.
Wow.
And, for a company called Quota Path, that's kind of important. So
I agree.
And I was told once a long time ago that you can judge the momentum and inspiration and feeling on how in a B2B SaaS company on how the sales team is doing. And if the sales team is winning, then it feels like there's a lot of momentum and a lot of winning in the company. And if they're losing, it doesn't feel like that way. So that's something that we're going to take with us in 2024. Here we
Sam,
are.
Sam had a board member once, if my memory is correct, that said teams that win keep winning, teams that lose or miss plan keep missing plan, right? Do you remember that conversation, Sam?
Yeah, it's our Peter, our current board member. He said numbers beaters tend to remain numbers beaters, and numbers missers tend to remain numbers missers. And so, AJ, we know he's a very, very talented commercial leader. In addition to being a great founder and CEO, numbers beaters. That's all. Numbers beaters.
Numbers beaters. And you know what inspired me to do, and hopefully maybe this inspires someone out there to do, is I started the year of meeting one-on-one with my team. And I got a really lovely note from Kelly, who we've had on the podcast. It's just being really fired up and saying that she wants to run through a wall. So that's really great. And I'm just in general excited.
That's
Numbers
cool.
meter.
That's cool.
Congratulations.
How are you, Sam?
I'm really good. Really good. I'm just taking advantage of January, dry January. So
Does that mean you're gonna be dry in Scottsdale?
Yeah, I think I am going to be dry in Scottsdale.
Shit.
I'm trying. I've never made it to the end of dry January dry, but I am going to make it to the end. I'm going to try. But for now,
give it our best shot.
January 3rd, I'm feeling really energized. I'm feeling really calm. I feel like we've got a good plan for the year. I don't feel frantic or anxious. I feel like I'm moving into the next phase of my reality, of my existence. So I feel centered and I feel good.
I feel the energy from both of you on this. Sam specifically, as soon as I showed up, you were like very calm, cool, and collected. But you know what? It's really doing it for me right now is your black sweatshirts that you're both wearing.
Excuse me, mine's maroon.
Oh,
Yeah.
jeez. I need
you look fantastic.
Yeah, both look great.
Okay, should we jump into this shit? We've got a lot to discuss today.
All right, we do. Let's go for
it. Swear jar, by the way, Austin. Swear jar.
Oh yeah, swear jar. Next episode, I need to work on this, guys.
This is the last episode.
Last episode with lots of swearing.
We want to appeal. We want to appeal to the masses, and we can appeal to the masses.
I'm gonna work on my language, but we've got a really interesting docket, so we're gonna jump in. So the first topic is some news that came out yesterday. So Harvard's president, Claudine Gay, has resigned because of pressure in response to her response to anti-Semitism on campus and plagiarism allegations that came out, which is kind of wild, right? Like if you think about it, you're the president of Harvard, you take that role knowing that you maybe did some left and right things while in university. That's kind of crazy. President Claudine Gay, as well as the presidents of MIT and University of Pennsylvania, have been under a lot of public pressure, especially from rich donors like Bill Ackman, after what was happening on campuses related to anti-Semitism, and especially after their performances in the U.S. Senate hearings that took place a little while ago. Now, the president of Harvard and of a university in Pennsylvania have resigned, and Bill Ackman has pointed his attention to the MIT president next. The core issue here is what's happening on campuses and the impact that's having on our youth. There have been a lot of philosophical debates in terms of what is right and what is wrong related to that. But what hasn't really been discussed much is how business leaders should be thinking about the people that they're going to hire from the cohorts that are graduating last year, this year, next year. And who've lived through a really interesting and intense experience. These experiences can develop resiliency and perspective. They can also develop bad habits and wrong point of views. And so let's break that down to start off the year. So Sam, can you reflect on how business leaders should be thinking about hiring folks from these groups, the advantages, the disadvantages, general thoughts?
Well, here's what I think. I think the first thing is I do believe that there should be consequences to decisions, but I don't believe that, and even though I'm Jewish and support Israel, I don't believe that these children should be punished for the rest of their lives if they engaged in some kind of free speech element that I personally disagree with, because I think that's pretty fundamental to our country, that people can say things that I disagree with. That doesn't mean I think it's okay to support genocide or killing Jewish people or any people. But I do think that's not the entirety of all of these students. So I just want to clarify that. Because people are young and people make mistakes and do some dumb stuff. And I did so many dumb things in college that if either anybody knew about them, including the two of you, including AJ's mom, not okay, wouldn't be okay. My friends that are listening right now are all laughing hysterically because they probably know it was even written about in the college paper, but I'm not saying what it was. but and it wasn't anything to do with labeling or speaking. It was something that happened to me when I was anyway, it doesn't matter. Here's the point. The point is, I don't really know that this has any. I don't have a point of view on whether or not these students engaged in being stupid, to be honest, and not being particularly well educated on the history of the Middle East, whether that should inform their job prospects. I think that what's happening and what we're witnessing, which we are not the only people to talk about, is really, I think that this has been a turning point for a lot of broader issues, which isn't quite what you asked, Asad, but I think that October 7th and what happened in Israel is actually an inflection point for the broader woke / progressive left movement. And I think the presidents of these universities are in the crossfire of that. And I think there's a reckoning. And I read something that on the internet that, because I think Google and Meta and a bunch of other companies have really dramatically reduced their DEI teams, and their the amount of people that are able to pursue a career in DEI is going to be dramatically reduced. And somebody said it turns out that DEI is a zero interest rate phenomenon. And I think that that's really the broader shift that's happening, I think, in companies and corporations is just representative of what we've been talking about for a long time, which is the shift from employees and candidates having leverage and excess money creating an opportunity for people to do things that might not always be directly business related, and frankly companies to overhire and overstaff in non-core and non-essential departments. And I'll leave it up to the listener to decide what those are for their company. And I think we're in a period, and honestly, I was talking to a well-known CEO yesterday on the phone, and he said, before we hang up, and we were talking about what is the theme of this year? What is the theme of 2024? And we were talking about how the theme of this year is CEOs as builders, and CEOs and founders focusing on their customers and focusing marginally less on investors, and saying, you know what? Our customers are going to determine, meaning profitability. Our customers are going to determine how we're going to proceed as a company, not our cap table. And then he said, and the last thing is, can we just ask everybody to get back to work, please? And he was really exasperated in his voice. And so what I think college students coming out of college are going to experience is the same thing the entire workforce is going to experience, which is on the margin, a lot less patience for things that don't directly contribute to the bottom line. And I think in this case, there's an argument to be made that Brian Armstrong was somewhat visionary. You might say ahead of the pack. You might really hate him. Visionary isn't necessarily positive or negative, but Brian Armstrong from Coinbase a couple of years ago at the height of Black Lives Matter and a bunch of these other issues said, hey, this is not going to be a place where we talk about politics. We're talking about crypto here because we work at Coinbase. And I think that for better or for worse, I think more people are emboldened to say, this is a place where we're going to do, but I would love to hear AJ's thought, because this is not dictated from on high. This is just my sense of things. But I think on the margin, CEOs are saying, we're going to be doing work here, and you're going to be measured and held accountable to the work. And that work is going to contribute to our growth as a company and serving our customers. And it's not really going to relate to anything else. And I think that's all happening in this context. And I think it's a phenomenon of capital being tight. I think it's a phenomenon of investors not having open checkbooks, and all the VCs saying, even Tomas Tunguz, who's going to be on the show pretty soon, and a bunch of other investors are saying Fred Wilson said 50% of VCs might go out of business. So, there's no more money. Things are going to stabilize because we've all done the hard things over the course of the last year, but there's no more money. So we're going to have to operate the business within the constraints of our customer base and the current balance sheet. And that means that we're going to have to be really, really focused on adherence to operational rigor and to profitability, and all the noise around that, I think, is just not going to be as interesting. And I've thought that. So I thought, again, my big takeaway is that October 7th is effectively, at least in the US, the end of the far left progressive left as we've come to know it over the past couple of years. And I think that they're not going to be as relevant. I think they're not going to be as, look at what's happened to Disney. Look at what's happened to the companies that are trying to take large social positions in divided populi where everybody doesn't agree. I don't think it's as transparent or as easy to understand that there's one clear position on every issue, especially given what happened in October, where social justice was conflated with a political issue that is far more complicated than the protests on these college campuses would indicate. And all of a sudden, when the progressive left effectively loses Jews, that's a big constituency for that side of it. And so what does that mean for somebody coming out of college? It means believe whatever you want to believe. It's still a place where free speech is recognized and rewarded, at least in Canada and the US where we live. But you're going to have to do real work, and you're going to have to put your head down, and it's going to have to contribute meaningfully and measurably to the bottom line performance of the company.
Sam, that's I'm so sorry that happened to you in college. What is that way back URL again? Did I miss that? So sorry.
My God. AJ's comic timing is very good. It's very good.
2024 election year. That's where we're starting with this. I think it's such a fascinating topic, Asid, because it really culminates a lot of the things Sam said. I fully agree with. The way I would put it in context for us as founders and operators in our company, and we saw this during the Black Lives Matter movement and just the election in 2020 cycle and COVID in general. The frustrating thing for me as a founder CEO was I felt like I didn't have control over the environment that my employees were working in. And there is nothing more frustrating as a CEO than having to like feel like you're speaking about a topic that you're not actually well versed, that there's an ignorance factor, but you feel like you have to make a move on because you want your employees to do the best work and you want them to feel safe and secure in the environment that they're working in. And that was really frustrating to go through that. And I don't think we're actually going to go through that this year. I actually think it's going to be a little bit different. The builder thing that Sam said is so key. Yeah. What is actually being missed in this venture piece of it is the rebuilding of cultures. You can't really say that out loud in your memos, in what you're doing, in your like, here are the things, here are the activities. But we as founders and CEOs are going to have to rebuild our culture and rebuild a trust a little bit within our organizations. We all went through rifts. We went through some challenging times. We went through uncertainty that really made and tested our mettle to who we are and who we believe in. We know the three of us, we talk about this, but we talk about this on like the challenges that we're going through, whether it's personal or whether it's professional. They hit us really hard. We're human beings. But how we act and how we lead with our organizations is what matters at the most at the end of the day. And to rebuild, to me, starts with the people. Yes, it starts with your customer, sure. But the people that are in your organization are your conduit to your customer, and making sure they feel inspired is what's going to matter. And that's what we'll see at the end of the year, because you're going to have a tornado of noise. It's going to be a massive amount of noise that's going to hit us really hard, and we have to be prepared for it. And the way to do that is just to make sure we're building our teams, we're listening to our customer, and those are the things that matter.
I think that's really interesting. I agree with this year is a reset year. And I think the Brian Armstrong memo, as well as Toby from Shopify, had a very similar memo. We are not a family. And Dudley Oni from Sequoia came out and made a statement where he said, you have to tolerate your family. I do not have to tolerate the people that I work with. This is a performance-driven organization. That's what matters over here. And I think that type of thinking is the right way to think about building a business. When I think about what's the advantage of what has just happened, I think of the fact that when a student is in the fourth year of university, they start hearing about the experiences of their friends who've graduated and gone into the workforce. And then they enter the workforce the next year. Those 2 years are really meaningful. So whatever is the economy in that moment and whatever is being optimized and not optimized really shapes that person for the very long term, right? Because those are the early habits that you develop as a professional. And so I think the people that were in 2019 and 2020 and the following years after that, they developed some really bad habits, right? Because they came into the workforce at the peak of low interest rates. And so when I think of the people that are going to be coming out of universities right now, there are a lot of people, not everybody is going to be great, but I think there's a subset of people that will have this one skill that I think is really valuable, which is the appreciation for free speech. I came to university in 2007. I studied public policy. I thought I was going to go into public service or be a lawyer. In certain classes, because of what I was studying, we would discuss it, but it was not part of the zeitgeist. It wasn't something that everybody cared about. And having lived in a society where you don't have free speech, you can see how damaging it is to not have it. It's kind of academic to debate it, how much should we have or not in North America? Living through the fact that you can't go and tell a person, in where I come from, you cannot tell a person you're an atheist. You will be killed. Like, that is just, it's standard. There's no question around it. And
hold on, Asid. Yeah. Actually, just for me, myself, and the listeners, you will be killed. Like, can you, I know that that's easy to pass over, but I truly want to understand and explain 100%. That. What does that mean? So like, if I went on the street and said like, hey, I don't believe in a God.
Extremely religious people believe that if you are part of Islam and then you move out of Islam, This is specific to people born as one and then who move out. It is the responsibility of those people to kill that person. There's a term for it. It's called wajibul qatl. That it is literally the responsibility of others to go and kill this person for what they've done. So people that are atheists, including myself, when we are there, we don't talk about it. We don't say, I've changed my point of view on this thing, or look at these idiosyncrasies that we have. You can't talk like that. And so when you realize how damaging the lack of free speech can be, you become obsessed with the need for it. It's why I came to North America. It's why I'm a free speech absolutist. And I think for a long time, we had people that just didn't understand how important this concept is. And I think because of what's happened on campuses recently, there's going to be a small subset of people that really understand the value of free speech, why you have to allow people that you really dislike to say something that you really disagree with and that can trigger you, but you got to let it be, because the opposite of that is letting somebody in power decide what can be said and not, and extrapolate that across 10 generations. You will have a number of people that will fuck that shit up completely. Sorry to all listeners. And so I think you definitely will now have people that have true appreciation for it. And in the business world, it's a powerful thing to have in an organization, which is why some of the greatest business leaders are so obsessed about free speech, because what you want is an organization where ideas are not just discussed and generated at the top level of your hierarchy, where you allow for ideas to generate from every part of your hierarchy, for good ideas to rise to the top and logic to win the discussion. And I think you can now find people that will have that level of appreciation for free speech, and hence the confidence to take part in discourse and give those ideas. You'll have to qualify for those people, right? Like, you'll have to make sure you're picking the right ones. But I think there are more of those people available than there were when I graduated.
How do you make decisions with those ideas? Oh, look at me, I'm jumping ahead in the docket. I'm doing it. That's that. I really appreciate your point of view and your like resolve around this. You said it's free speech absolutists.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like that's something that you've thought about and you've like worked.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
I think it's just going back to the fact that when you live in a society that's really, in Pakistan, when I grew up, wasn't economically doing well. The society wasn't doing well. And you just look at what are the root causes of a lot of these problems. And I think one of them is that you just can't talk about things openly. Like, you're afraid to have conversations. Discourse is not something that you can easily have. And so you deal with the pressure of it. And you realize that that's not a feeling that people in other societies have. And there's a reason why they don't have it. The founding fathers of the US were just these geniuses, right? They figured shit out really well. And you realize what their thinking was around it. There's so much literature on this concept and why this is one of the most critical foundations of a free society. And it's very attractive when you've suffered against the opposite of it. I think it is much harder to appreciate it in its fullness, to be a free speech absolutist. Growing up in a society that has it, it's much harder to be a free speech absolutist than coming from a society that didn't have it. I think for me, it was much easier to be like, yep, that's the way. Okay, so so we have another interesting topic, which is something that came out yesterday. Canva is about to complete $1 billion stock sale for employees and investors, 6 months after they did something very similar, smaller, but a similar deal. And this one is happening at the same valuation as that one, which was $26 billion, which is about $14 billion less than the number that they raised their last funding round at the peak of the pandemic. Now, bankers and investors predict a rise in this over the coming years, mainly because in the short term, there's a need for liquidity. Investors need it, employees need it, etc. And the IPO window is shut. M&A isn't happening ferociously the way people thought it would last year. And so this is another option. OpenAI is publicly exploring this option right now with Thrive Capital. Figma is considering it. Last year, CoreWeave had a $642 million secondary sale. Stripe had a $7 billion transaction of a very similar nature. I don't think investors took part in it, but it was for the employees and it was very public. Now, price is obviously a sticking point with these deals. They're all happening at a discount to the rounds that these companies raised in 2020 and 2021, if they raised then. But early employees and investors are still willing to do them in cases because of the material upside compared to what they got last time or when they got in. The flexibility might decrease as interest rates go up and valuations in the public markets come up. And there are also some really interesting rules, like most VCs are not allowed to have more than 20% of their fund to be secondary shares. So that might cause a limitation. Now, a lot of our listeners are from early and growth stage companies. And so I think what's interesting to consider is that how should they be considering utilizing this option? Like, when is it too early? What's the right moment? How should you think about this? Sam, what are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts are, I don't think it's something that people should really need to worry about or think about, because I think that the market for these secondary transactions is not particularly liquid and not particularly robust. Even if they happen more often, they happen for companies that had lots and lots of options and that were already at multi-billion-dollar valuations. And I can say from both firsthand and secondhand experience, the problem sometimes that happens when people hear these stories is they think, oh, my 8 million ARR business, there must be a ton of demand for people that want to own a percentage of the company. And really what we're seeing is, and what I've seen over the course of the years, even in the height of the boom, is that there really isn't that much demand for private illiquid companies that don't produce a lot of reporting. And Figma or some of these other deals, I also don't know, what the terms of these transactions are, or what type of ownership stakes, or just what the fine print is around these transactions. But I think if you're at an early stage company, I mean, the reality hasn't changed that much from last year, and you said the M&A market isn't particularly active, but I do think, and we talked about this before New Year's, we talked about, will the regulators killing the Adobe Figma deal, will that have a very chilling, I think at the very high end on monopolistic type acquisitions, multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, I think it might have a chilling effect. But I think there's going to be a robust market, and we talked about Spiff and the $400 million Salesforce acquisition being an example of that. I think there will be a robust M&A market for sub $500 million transactions. And I think if you're a 5, 10, $15 million business that has good prospects, well, first of all, if somebody, I guess the number one rule I have is if you're working at a private company and somebody offers you any money at all for your shares, always say yes. That's my rule. That's my first rule. Always say yes. It is very, very hard to take money out. I mean,
yes.
unless, there are, of course, it's, I'm sure there are exceptions to that rule, but generally speaking, I know very few people that are bummed that they sold at the height that they ever sold. And I know far more people that are kicking themselves that they didn't sell. So first rule is, if you ever get the opportunity to get liquid, always get a little liquid, if not completely liquid. And then the second is, and don't worry about it, because it's probably not going to happen. But I think the more likely thing that'll happen this year is just a marginal increase in the amount of M&A activity that's going to be happening, because I think the markets are up. That means public SaaS businesses and tech businesses, their currency, meaning their stock, is more valuable. And I think that there is an opportunity for consolidation across a number of, and we've talked about this a bunch. Yeah. So, listen, if you have an opportunity, if you're working at Figma, if you're working at Canva, if you're working at one of these companies and somebody offers you a bunch of money, obviously the answer is yes. I worked at GLG for 7.5 years, and there were a number of liquidity moments. And every time somebody offered to buy, or there was a dividend, or there was some kind of buyback, I always tried to say yes a little bit, if not a lot of it, and I don't regret that at all. So that's what I think.
Similar experience for me, at Trendkite on our way up, had multiple times where I sold, and I sold for a quarter or even half as the amount that it eventually got to when we sold for 225 million. I don't regret it whatsoever. Of course, I kept the majority of my holdings for that bigger exit, but it allowed some level of financial, I won't say financial freedom, but like financial pressure release valve. And I'm, we're talking about like something that is in a very, 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 very small number of employees right now. Like, this is not what most of our listeners are probably dealing with. I think that you said the early stage aspect of it. And I would just go back to the same mentality that the CEOs and founders have. If they're galvanizing your teams to be builders, then be a builder. And really don't worry about it. It's easy to get caught. Yeah.
On that, so if we're talking about builders, right? does this change how people think about building their companies? Because if you are building a high quality company, this need for liquidity would force you to either want to go public or for an M&A transaction, right? Those are your kind of your two options there. But now there's this third option. Like if you're OpenAI and you don't want to operate your business under the scrutiny of the public markets, right? You want to keep things a little bit secretive. Are you going to just keep yourself private for way longer and just do these transactions to get your investors off the cap table, get employees their liquidity, and then you get to operate your business under this level of secrecy because you prefer it? And that also changes growth stage companies when they go public, right? They're more like value companies.
Yeah, but I mean,
what do you think about that?
OpenAI is very, very unique in lots of different ways. We know this, but their charter is just very different. So their employees, like when they get hired, just think a bit differently. There's like very big private companies. Bloomberg is a private company, right?
Yeah.
Bechtel is a massive private company. These companies are very old, they're in construction and whatever, but they're not venture backed like equity type companies that you would hold. So I would just say that there's just so many different companies. We're talking about venture backed companies, right? Where the typical from start to finish is like average is 7 years or something like that. The last 4 years have really like we've had to reinvent ourselves. We had to find product market fit. We've had to cut costs. We've had to change. You can't take that 7 years as the rule of thumb. And I think that that's what puts the pressure on these venture funds altogether. The 50%, I didn't read that article that Fred Wilson said. I'd be fascinated to understand what data he's looking at to say 50%. That seems quite high. If you put that in the docket, I missed it. I'm sorry. But
I didn't see it actually. Sam, you got to share with us.
Sam.
What was on his predictions? Maybe I'm overstating 50%, but his point is that his point has always been, and it's been constant throughout the last 15, 20 years, which is that there's a finite amount of good companies.
Yeah.
Everything flows from that, and capital is not the constraint. That has been his point the whole time. And he says VC is a boutique business. It is not a mainstream business. Every attempt to make it mainstream has never worked out. That's true. I believe that's true. And you can see other pundits now. And there's some people, which is really fascinating because some people are talking about how VC has become a mainstream job and it's a thing that people aspire to. And I think they've mistimed that statement because that was maybe true a couple of years ago when there was more capital available. Yeah. But LPs are not writing big checks and returns for VC is not very good. And even some of the VCs that we all know that are like these stage 2 like operators, with large networks that are where I'm looking at the DPI and it's like, I mean, most VCs don't do that well. That's the bottom line.
It's a tough business.
Yeah. So anyway,
I don't know if that's true though. I would say VCs make management fees and they're the investors at the end of the day.
I think in the aggregate, most of the returns accrue to the very top percentile of VCs. I think that's a fact. And I think most funds, I don't know. I mean, we can look at the average management fee, but I just think that most people don't do that well in VC.
It's an interesting data point. I think there's, I'm fascinated with this. So what is 50%? If we get rid of 50% of the VCs, what does that look like? What changes? What shifts? And like what, is I think about predictions for this year. And we talked about this when we first started the podcast right after SVB, like when does things get better? When do they ease up? When do they get better? And we talked about interest rates and we talked about, venture flowing. I think I've said this and I've gone back and forth because I'm just optimistic, maybe more for ourselves, is just like, is there still the reckoning? Is there still we lost X number of companies. Austin, you had it somewhere, a couple thousand companies last year. I'm sure Carter will give us the data on that. Is that 10X this year?
Oh, that's interesting. I think you'll see shutdowns this year, but you'll also see kind of this counter momentum, right? You'll see good things and you'll see some companies that have just been holding on for dear life that will no longer be able to hold on. But I don't predict a year that's worse than last year, but what do I know? See, I corrected myself.
You did. By the way, I can't find the 50%, so I think that's probably a dramatic overstatement on my part.
You can find it in Wayback Machine. Sam,
look at that intellectual honesty. College. I love it.
I love that.
I just needed to own it, but
and with that, a word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Clary, the only unified system purpose-built to help you run revenue. Spending your Sunday nights manually inspecting deals and jotting down actions for your sellers? That's the old way. Clary's platform surfaces the insights sellers need and allows them to take action, all in the flow of work, so nothing ever falls through the cracks again. See how Clary can help you run revenue like a pro at clary.com. Here's what he wrote, by the way. So he says, in addition, we are seeing many large firms scale back or even shut down, and new firms are struggling to raise funds. This is a rationalization of a sector that got very big very fast in the last decade and will need time to find a new normal because venture funds have a 10-year life, but often take much longer to fully liquidate. The venture capital business changes more slowly than the businesses it funds. I think we're a couple years into a transition that will take at least the first half of this decade to play out. So while the capital markets will likely be robust in 2024, I do not expect that venture capital investing and venture capital fund formation to grow that much year over year in 2024. So I think I totally misspoke on the 50%.
But the main point is still right, which is it's a 10-year fund. If you say 2020 to 2024 is like, we had to figure some shit out. Apologize. We had to figure some things out.
Swearing is proving extremely difficult.
And where are we at that? So let's say that 2018 started. This is when quote started. 2017, 20 started 18.
Yeti.
There it is. Austin's favorite brand. 2017, 2018 started this. And I think I would be very interested to see what some of these funds look like in 12 to 24 months. That's what this is really going to play out to. And that's kind of fascinating. And we're, the three of us are in the middle of it in a lot of ways.
I think what's going to be the most interesting is like you saw these founders that had raised like this side hustle fund, and then you had these content creators that had a side hustle fund, and a lot of that's just going to have no legs in it, and it's going to have terrible returns, no legs. They won't raise another fund. Like a lot of it is when it comes.
Yeah, don't tell Lemkin that. Don't tell Jason that.
Well, it's not a side fund. That's his main business.
Yeah, that's his main business.
He was very clear. Like, I don't believe that.
Yeah, he's done well.
Yeah,
no, but I've seen some spreadsheets on some funds that we all know that I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be terrible.
Good grief, guys. What are you doing? Yeah, it's interesting. And I think there are a lot of those funds out there. And that's where you're going to see a lot of the pain. But the challenge is that they might not get to raise a second fund. And there comes a point at which you're like, okay, by now they should have raised a second fund because it takes you like 2-3 years to deploy a fund. So if it's time to raise fund number 2 and you haven't raised it, that's the end of that thing. And that's what you're going to see.
That's the zombie funds that AJ was talking about. That's the zombie
funds, right? You might not hear them say we're shutting down, but it's a zombie fund. Okay, let's get operational. We've pontificated for a bit. We're going to get operational now. So Sam.
Here's the good stuff. The stuff we're going to actually help you.
Okay, so Sam, you made a really interesting post yesterday, and I was thinking about it for a lot. So you spoke about the pace of decision making and how that pace has to evolve from speed and nimbleness and intuition at the early stage of your business to slower, thoughtful, data-driven decisions as your company gets to a later stage in its life cycle. Let's say $10 million in ARR. The way you make your decisions is very different to when you are searching for product market fit. And I think it's a really fascinating post. People should go read it. That it makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Asid.
Yeah, I liked it. I thought about it.
People like it.
I love hearing from my fans.
I told you guys how my mom found one of our episodes on YouTube, and her message was, saw your episode on YouTube, gave it a like.
Give it a like and subscribe.
I was like, thank you.
Down below the comments.
So this is what I struggle with, though, which is that, and I think others do as well, is figuring out the right pace for the different decisions at the different stages. Example, what are some big important decisions that you can make relatively quickly when you're 10 million in ARR? Because I feel like what sometimes happens is you get larger and you have more data and you're supposed to be more thoughtful, that you just become slower with every decision because that's the way you're supposed to be. And I think you should be optimizing for maximum nimbleness for whatever is appropriate nimbleness at each stage. So I don't know how to balance these things, Sam. How do I balance them?
Well, I think you have to, Jeff Bezos.
Oh.
I was talking about this well before you texted AJ, but AJ's going to concur.
AJ, no, you're stealing my idea. This is mine.
He talks about type 1 and type 2 decisions. Anyway, the point is, I think that there's a lot of decisions that are reversible that aren't that big a deal. For me, the biggest examples of those are marketing decisions. Like, what's in the email copy? What's the offer? What kind of campaign are you going to write? Can you modify your talk track with your SDRs to say this versus that? I think all of those decisions are pretty easy to unwind. I think the big decisions that you have to be more thoughtful about are pricing decisions. Should we enter this market or not? And, AJ has a bunch of thoughts, so I don't want to steal more of his thunder than I've already stolen. But I will say the difference is that all of those at an early stage, they're all reversible decisions. When you have no technical debt, no operational debt, when you have no system or process, adding one more spreadsheet, one more thing, making a big decision on pricing. When we were rising up through past 10 million, but like rising up as Revenue Collective and then Pavilion, I would change prices all the time. We only had a couple hundred members. It didn't really matter, and now we have 10,000 members and it actually matters a great deal. And unwinding a pricing decision is a multi-million-dollar impact because you have a bunch of people paying an old price or on an old edition, and you have to think about how you want to rationalize that. So my point is that, and it was very specific to me in the sense that I'd leverage, because I'd always been this proponent of very fast decision making. And I have this, I was just looking at this, listeners, I got 31 million impressions on LinkedIn last year.
Wow.
And my most popular post is about this concept
and
of
Austin
decision.
only made up 29 million of them.
Austin is both of our biggest cheerleaders, AJ. You ever need to pick me up, just text Austin. He'll tell you. He's like, it's okay. It's okay. It's actually for the best. But anyway, my point is, I had this thing about the decision coefficient, which is basically, it's a fake math construct that articulates that people that make more decisions make more correct decisions. And that if you assume that most decisions are reversible, then the speed of decision making is actually the number one gating factor of covering as much ground as possible and executing, which is sort of your point, Asid. And the thing that happened was that I adhered to that too long for decisions that were too big. The decision to get rid of chapters wasn't fully vetted and was really just something that I decided on my own in conversation with a few people on my team. Decision to raise prices to our current price points over the last couple of years, not really a decision that I talked to a lot of people about. Certain big things that we did, I didn't really vet. And, listening to Lex Friedman interview Jeff Bezos, one of the things that he talks about is the pursuit of truth. And for big decisions, you want to keep pursuing the truth as much as possible. And that's something that takes a long time that bores me sometimes. And so I fell in love with and I think I've talked about this in the past, but one of the big evolutions for me as a leader is I used to think that if I felt something strongly in my intuition, that therefore it was true or most likely to be true. And there wasn't necessarily a need for a lot of debate and we should just do it. And so I was in search of, in the same way that if you never invest in the stock market, you might have an idea or two about some good companies. And when you invest, they do really well. And you think, oh my God, I'm really good at this. And then you start looking for that sense of conviction. And it can be, it can be a red herring. It can be blinding to you. It can be a false positive. So I fell in love with a sense of conviction. And I spent all my time looking for a sense of conviction, which isn't quite the same thing as looking for the truth. And that's why I wrote that post, because I think as you get bigger, you need to measure and weigh your decisions against the impact that they'll have on the business. If they're easily reversible, sure, speed is great. If they're not easily reversible, then be very fast about getting the data that you need to get to the truth. But for me, it was about moving off of this feeling of conviction, which I fell in love with. I love the feeling of being right, the feeling of all of the uncertainty in the universe had been eliminated, and I saw the bright, shining tunnel that I just needed to go through. Yeah. And that can be misleading, and I never knew that it was misleading until I made a bunch of huge mistakes and realized that that feeling is not the only thing. It's not the trumping factor in a decision-making framework.
That's such an interesting point, because that feeling can be really dangerous, because sometimes we get that intuition, we make a decision and it's the right decision. And that is this magical feeling. Like you literally feel like a superhero in that moment, right? And so then it entrenches a habit that becomes much harder to break than bad habits that we know are not doing well for us. AJ, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, Sam said he was going to steal my thunder, but I'm just going to give him credit. He in 2015 wrote this letter to the shareholders, how we think about decision making at Pavilion. So no, it's a fascinating look. Sam's obviously has done some really great thinking on just decisions that Pavilion has made. And over the break on the retro, I came across this post, this one-way door, two-way door that Sam referenced, which is type 1, type 2. So one-way door decisions that are consequential. They're not, you just can't, you can only go one way. You can't reverse it. And they have to be made methodically, carefully, slowly, with great deliberation and consultation. What I hear with that is find your thought partners and debate them and figure them out. Like find the people that you trust and that you care about and that are open to giving you critical feedback and just go in, don't go in objectively and just really, really think through those decisions. The other side of it though, which is one where I actually am going to try to work with my team to empower my team, is the two-way door that are changeable and reversible. Sam mentioned marketing and copy, and I think that those are great. Where I would say that about the management team is that there's like some of our decisions as we think about our org design and hierarchy and cross collaboration that I wish we come to a decision, a consensus even on some of those, and there's a lag factor in it. And that's what I'm going to try to do for 2024 is to just push those decisions as a leader and get that drumbeat a little bit faster. I think that is really important because then it shows for the rest of the organization, oh, here's the decisions that we can make and be okay with. And here's the ones that like we really need to think through. And honestly, in our kickoff coming up in a couple of weeks, this is something that I'm actually going to introduce and talk to with the team, because I think it's just so important. And it's something that I feel like has held us back. It's almost this like start, stop, continue type framework. And I just want us to stop delaying on reversible decisions. Just fucking make the decision and move forward with it. That's what I want from our team this year.
I think that's so fascinating. It's almost like you need a running list of here are one-way doors, here are two-way doors, right? And that list keeps getting built up so that when new people come into the organization, they can look at it, they'll be like, okay, great, I get it. If we're talking about mission and vision, let's take a minute when we're $10 million because we can't easily change that. But if we're trying to deploy an ad campaign, let's be more nimble, let's be faster, let's be experimental. Really,
let me read Jeff's quote or Sam's quote right now. This is good. This is the quote though. As organizations get larger, there seems to be a tendency to use type 1 decision-making process on most decisions, including many type 2 decisions. The end result of this is slowness, unthoughtful risk aversion, failure to experiment sufficiently, and consequently diminished innovation. We'll have to figure out how to fight that tendency. That last part, figure out how to fight that tendency it's a really interesting quote and anecdote. It almost feels like a throwaway comment, but it's not at all. It's you have to fight. I equate this to when you're aviation and flying airplanes. By the way, the best gift that I got, second shout out. This is just a shout out episode, by the way. It's to my wife, where you can't see, there's a little bit of a glare, but my wife took the old wing bolts of my airplane that were taken out, the things that hold the plane together. Sam, you flew with those wing bolts.
I love those wing bolts.
Oh yeah, those wing bolts kept us alive.
They were my favorite part of the plane.
And they
those
kept
are
it
some great wing bolts.
Put it up there. But it's when you're flying and you have to trust your instruments. You have to trust. If you're flying in a cloud, it's really easy to get vertigo and feel like you're in a left bank when you're flying straight and level. And so trust your instruments, trust but verify in these instances. And I think that's just the really interesting part. We just have to fight this counter piece to it and just be like, we have to push against this. We cannot let complacency, we cannot let our standards rest on our laurels or our standards lowered. We have to fight against these. I'm going off. Sorry.
I like it. This is interesting because you got both point of views, right? Like there are decisions that you need to take more time with, but you can't allow it for you to tilt into just taking a lot of time for every decision. And so you need to like find a way as a leader to identify first what type of decision is this, and then go through the process of working through it. That's your first question. What type of decision is that? And so on that note,
shout outs.
Go shout outs.
Wins of the week.
Wins and shout outs. Who's run first?
Well, I used all mine, so I'm not.
You have to do it because you used all yours. You have to come up with one on the fly.
On the fly. Okay, I'm gonna shout out my brother Eric, who is a not just an avid listener, but I said my wife got me a cool gift. He actually got me a really cool gift. You guys are going to be so excited for this. You ready? He built me a life-size, a real ice plunge. And so like I'll send a picture of it. I'll have it on LinkedIn. So I'm not just like huddled up, but he built it. It's constructed out of wood. It's going outside and it's so badass and it's awesome.
What a sweet guy.
He's awesome.
Eric.
Yeah, he built one for my brother. We had dinner and it weighs 550 pounds. So we had to like get it to his garage. It has jets. It's so cool. Eric, shout out.
Eric the politician.
Eric the politician. You know, Eric had I hope he's okay with sharing this. He had a rough end of the year. His dad, his apologize. His dog passed away in
I'm sorry.
So he had a really tough end of the year. Yeah. He's doing okay, but he spent a lot of time, a lot of effort. He makes up our the other 2 million impressions on Sam's.
Him and Asa do a great service.
Do a good job.
Me.
But just a huge shout out for Eric. Thank you for being a great brother. And maybe I'll talk about my other brother, Mark, someday, but we don't need to then.
We care about Mark.
You have another brother?
I have another brother that's in startups. It's a VP of product.
Wow, this is
climate
crazy.
climate change company.
Do you all get along? I feel like there's something going on there.
He worked at Google, and his wife is the head of design at Netflix.
Mark.
Yeah,
Mark
like
Bruno. Yeah,
of course.
They're estranged.
We know
obviously.
Who your favorite is.
They're obviously estranged. Mark, we care about you.
Yeah,
we care about you.
No.
Okay, Eric, shout out to Eric. That's the coolest gift ever. I love people that are so handy because I can't even change a light bulb. Sam, who's your shout out?
All right, I got a shout out for you. Let me tell you a little story.
Oh, let's go.
A little story. The bad guys were in red, and the good guys were in maize and blue. And listen, Michigan had been to the college football playoffs twice before. They'd lost in the first round each time, and it really wasn't that close. And even though they were 2.5-point favorites against Alabama, who I think are 9-time national champions, a lot of people didn't think they could pull it off, but it was a team of destiny. But here's the point. They had a lead, 13-10 going into half. In the second half, Alabama made a bunch of great adjustments and pulled ahead, and they were up 20-13, and yards and offense was hard to come by with, I think, 3.5 minutes left, maybe 4 minutes left in the game. And Michigan had to go down the field and score a touchdown just to put it into overtime. And that's exactly what they did. And they'd had a bunch of mishaps and a bunch of miscues, and JJ McCarthy and had a couple of really big pass plays, including a 4th and 2 conversion to Blake Corum. They put the game into one against Alabama. This is Alabama. This is Nick Saban's Alabama. This is Roll Tide. This is one of the most formidable college football. In fact, it's the second most winning program in college football history besides Michigan. And then in overtime, they won the game. And Blake Corum's touchdown run was absolutely amazing to look at. And he's amazing. You know, these kids, I don't know the people that are out there that are watching the college football season or the bowl, but it's really weird. And it's become really weird. And I'm sure they're going to fix it. But most teams are not playing their starters. And many starters, actually, there's this thing also called the transfer portal. And it opens before the end of the season. So there's people that are transferring to different schools and leaving the team that they played the whole season on before the end of the season. So Ohio State had a bowl game against Missouri, and it felt like a scrimmage because most of the players didn't play. In fact, Marvin Harrison Jr., their number one receiver, sat out, not because he transferred, but because he's going to go pro and he didn't want to get hurt. And my point is, Blake Corum was injured a year ago and could have gone pro and came back for his 4th year at Michigan to try and win a national championship. And this guy, what is he, 5'8", 5'9", and like built like a Mack truck. And my point is that these kids sacrificed to come back in pursuit of something bigger and greater than themselves. And and they're playing for the national championship against Washington on Monday. And I just want to say, go blue. And I was crying. I was crying Monday night. If you're listening to this on Sunday or Monday, then the game hasn't been played yet against UW. But I was crying because it's a big deal. My father and my family's had some health issues recently, and he went to Michigan, and it was a big deal. So go blue, and it's just really inspiring to see people overcome adversity in that way.
That's a really cool story.
It's a great story. And also Michigan center, was he at the game? Because he got hurt.
Tackle. It was a left tackle that I forget that he got hit. He got hurt in the Ohio State game and broke his leg, and he's like their top prospect. He was at the game.
He was at the game. If we want to talk about it docket wise, if we want to spend some time on NIL and portal, that is a fascinating and economical.
It's fascinating. It's so weird.
Mess. It's a total disaster.
It's a mess. College football is a total disaster.
I'm excited to look into this because those words meant nothing to me. I was like, what is that? NIL and PLL or whatever. So I'm down. Like I'd love to leave
today. Ohio State lost their quarterback, but they also in the portal, but they also lost one of their top receivers, Julian Fleming, and he committed to Penn State today. So
that's great. And he'll play at Penn State for 10 games and then transfer somewhere else.
No, he's got 1 year left eligibility. He's done, but you're right.
All right, folks. This was the first episode of the new.
Did Austin?
Austin, go.
Shit. Okay.
Austin did a shout out.
I'll do a shout out. I'm going to shout out 2 of my MDs, Armen Tankovic and Ali Alizadeh. And because I noticed that without trying to be noticed doing it, they were in the office during the holidays, trying to get prepared for the upcoming year. And I thought about, do I want to shout this out? Because you do want people to take a break if they need to take a break, right? But you also want people to understand how to manage their own energy levels. And when they feel inspired to do something, they should do it. And if they're going above and beyond, I think that deserves appreciation. So I appreciate seeing that they were doing it during those days, the 28th, the 29th, that they were not trying to be noticed doing it, and that they were just setting themselves up to have a great year, which is why they've consistently been the top 2 or 3 people in the business. So shout out to these 2 guys. And with that, that's the episode.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to the first episode of the year for Topline. Please tell a few of your friends to subscribe. We promise not to swear in future episodes. Yes. We're trying to break through 75,000 downloads this year. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I feel like that's a good target. Great.
Let's do it.
I think we got 16,000.
Where did that come from? Is that a type 2 or type 1 decision making?
Give us 5 stars on iTunes. Tell your friends. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you on Thursday for Topline Hotline.
Thursday. Bye, everyone. So long.
This episode was brought to you by Affinity for Salesforce. Automate the creation, update, and enrichment of Salesforce records and use your network and relationship insights to find, manage, and close more deals. Check out Affinity at go.affinity.co/pavilion.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Topline. To learn more about the trends, news, and developments impacting the world of B2B SaaS, head to joinpavilion.com, where more than 10,000 of the world's top go-to market leaders go to achieve and unlock their full professional potential.